Today we discuss an essay on dramatic poesy by John Dryden. It's an important essay written by John Dryden during neoclassical age, along with Alexander Pope and Dr. Johnson. John Dryden was born in the year 1631 and he lived up to 1700, being a very prominent English poet, critic, translator, and playwright. Dominated the literary life of the Restoration age. We call this age as a Restoration age because King James was restored to throne after Queen Elizabeth. Therefore, this is called the Restoration age. At the same time, this is also called an age of Dryden because he dominated the literary scene so much to an extent that we call an age of Dryden. We also call this age as an age of Augustan age. Dryden was a Cambridge scholar, and that made all the difference. Naturally, he was a literary genius and critic. One may understand when we talk about John Dryden why he stood apart from the rest of the literary writers and critics is his formal academic background, being a Cambridge scholar. The court, of course, in England recognized his merit as a literary figure and his extraordinary literary contribution. He was given the honor of Poet Laureate of England in 1668. Something what we used to hear in Tamil, Avai Pullavar. Something like this. Dryden was granted with the honor of Poet Laureate in England in 1668. Dryden was a critic of a contemporary reality, that time, that particular reality, contemporary in the sense during 1600 to 1700. Therefore, his critical observation was very much influential. In fact, his critical observation of a contemporary reality of that age, Augustan age, or Restoration age, a neoclassical age, or Augustan age, is reflected in MacFlecknoe, another writer, who also lived along with John Dryden. Dryden's mature thoughts of literary criticism on ancient, modern, and English literature, especially on drama, are presented in a dialogue form in an essay on dramatic poesy. Naturally, there was a debate whether the ancient writers, classical writers, were great or the modern writers were great, whether the literature written in England was great, whether the literature written in France was great. So this kind of opinion remained among the people. Therefore, there was a kind of a debate that was going on in the mind of the people, and that is what exactly John Dryden has reflected in an essay on dramatic poesy. In fact, it is a kind of a dialogue among four friends, conversationalist. And one of the characters even represent John Dryden himself, which I will tell you elaborately a little later. So among the four friends, the debate was the merits of ancients and the moderns, and the merits of the English and the French. In an essay on dramatic poesy, of course, there are four speakers, as I told you, and one argues strongly as to which one is better, ancient or modern, or French or English. John Dryden was a critic of a very good reputation, and 1 minute, whether students, I don't have to admit them, they all join. Okay. Yeah. He was a critic of a good repute, as I told you, because he had a rather a dogmatic bent. He had a base, theoretical base, based on which he spoke always. That is the reason why he was revered as one of the good critics of that particular. Yeah. Most of his critical interpretations are found in the prefaces of his own works. This is something John Dryden's practice. Even for All for Love, which I told you the other day, that it is a kind of a rewritten version of Antony and Cleopatra with all the observance of unities of time, place, and action, and all the tenets that Aristotle advocated. Dryden, of course, also revealed an interest in the general issues of criticism rather than a close reading of a particular text. He was not interested in reading a particular text and giving his observation. He was interested in giving a generalized opinion, kind of his own opinion on drama, his own understanding on poetry, something like this. Dryden puts emphasis on the neoclassical rules. His best known critical work, of course, is an essay on dramatic poesy. The word poesy is poetry. Dramatic poesy. What is dramatic poesy? Poetry or poetics of drama, or the grammar of drama. That's how you should understand the structure of a drama, or the aspects of a drama. The dialogue form, as I told you, is much easier for him to express various points of view as an objective writer, but at the very same style of dialogue was criticized by many of his contemporaries as it was very inconclusive. Dryden could have thought that it was his duty to kind of juxtapose various points of view and for the readers to conclude which one is good or bad. Perhaps he didn't want to sound very conclusive because he would not have invited so much of criticism being so much affiliated to one particular point of view. That was one of the reasons he could have sounded very inconclusive. You might even understand at the end of reading of this text what he exactly means. Dryden, of course, carried out his critical thoughts very effectively, stating his own ideas, but leaving some room for differences of opinion. Neander, one of the four characters that you may come across in preface to Essay on Dramatic Poesy, is John Dryden himself. Neander is John Dryden's spokesperson. So whatever Neander says in favor of English drama, modern English drama, is true of Dryden's opinion. That is how we should understand, and that is what is generally accepted opinion. Dryden believes that Shakespeare did not follow the rules, but are nevertheless obviously superior to any regular writer. That is where I think John Dryden is very clever. John Dryden, being a neoclassicist, was not very prejudiced against great writers like Shakespeare who lived before. He simply accepted the ingenuity of Shakespeare in writing plays. That way, I think John Dryden was very, very objective. For him, for John Dryden, Shakespeare, who lived before, his ancestor, the Shakespeare was a superior writer with all his defects from the point of view of neoclassical writers, defect in the sense. Therefore, Dryden recognized the superiority of Shakespeare, but within himself, he would feel very closer affiliation to Ben Jonson. Because as I told you, Ben Jonson, though he lived during the transition between Elizabethan and neoclassicism, to an extent followed the classical rules more than many others who lived during Elizabethan age, including Shakespeare. And that is the reason why John Dryden felt very closer to Ben Jonson, not to Shakespeare much, even though he calls Shakespeare as a superior writer. In Dryden, we also find a liberal neoclassicist, although he is most coherent when he is dealing with what we call neoclassical tenets as expressed in his prefaces. That means he is a kind of academician, a scholar, so he was very, very coherent in his expressions. Therefore, he was a true representative of neoclassical age. Okay, now what is John Dryden's opinion on the nature of poetry? Dryden agrees in general with Aristotle's definition of poetry as a process of imitation. Many of you would have understood the theory behind Aristotle's poetics, especially the definition of a poet. Not only poetry, any art, it should be an imitation. It should be mimetic. The generally accepted view of poetry in John Dryden's day was different. It had to be close imitation of facts, past or present. John Dryden had no problem with this definition of imitating the facts, whether it is past or present. Okay, but he wanted to be little different in being imitating that particular fact, whether it was past or present. Right, he was really little different in his opinion to be of an imitator of a fact. That is exactly the point. In The Grounds of Criticism on Tragedy, that's another essay that he wrote, he makes out a case for a double-edged, double-legged imitation. What is an alternative when he was not happy or contented with the accepted norms of the classicism? What was the difference that he wanted to bring in? That is, he says that when the poet is free to imitate, things are as they are said or thought to be. Okay, things are as presented, as seen, as thought to be. Okay, That is what the poet is imitating. Correct. But then he gives the example of Shakespeare, who imitated the human nature, not simply whatever he saw in the world, whatever that he encountered in the world. Shakespeare is the one who is still talked about much because of his ability to represent the human nature. Iago, what kind of nature he is. Othello, what a plain person. Similarly, King Lear, so arrogant, very proud of his own status as a king. So varied. Hamlet, like many of us postponing things, so varied in nature. Similarly, women characters, Rosalind, so clever. Portia, so knowledgeable. And similarly, Imogen in Cymbeline is also very, very clever, at the same time very subdued character. So these are all characters only to substantiate how Shakespeare can be insightful in portraying the psychological nature of different individuals. So this is exactly what Dryden also wanted. A poet can be an imitator, but then he should also imitate the nature that appeals to humanity, the human nature that appeals to humanity. I think that is where John Dryden was very happy or contented with Shakespeare, who sounded to him as superior, even though he liked Ben Jonson. That's a point that you should all keep it in mind. Then, what are the functions of John Dryden? What are the functions of poetry right now? This is where you clearly understand what exactly John Dryden says. Combining all the arguments or definitions given by classical writers, starting with the Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Longinus, and so on, he is able to combine and arrive at a kind of a balanced definition. That is what you should understand. As all of us know, Plato wanted poetry to only to instruct the reader. That is why he banished the poets from his utopia. Because poets, he thought, might be exciting, might be sensational. Poets always uses emotion. So there is no room for emotion in his republic, Plato's republic. Therefore, he wanted poetry to instruct. Of course, Aristotle wanted poetry to delight. Now, these are the two opposing elements that occupied the minds of two great classical writers, Plato and Aristotle. Plato wanted poetry to instruct. Aristotle wanted poetry to delight. Of course, Horace, you could have heard, wanted poetry to do both instruction and delighting. There has been a long drawn debate on whether literature is to instruct or to delight, whether its purpose is moral or to please, pleasure or instruction. This debate has been going on for a very long time. Both Aristotle and Plato differed in their opinion, whereas Horace wanted to combine these two. And Longinus wanted poetry to transport. Longinus was very, very clever in saying that poetry should be a kind of a vehicle for pleasure, instruction, or any emotion, and only for readers to take it from that form of transportation. So Dryden was a bit moderate and considerate in the views. Therefore, he was of the opinion that the final end of poetry is delight and transport rather than instruction. He has taken two points. The end, The end purpose of any poetry should be delighting, making readers enjoy, pleasurable, okay, delight, and also transport, be a vehicle of ideas. That's all. Not end up with instruction, because a poem is not a sermon. A poem can never be reduced to that kind of moral instruction. That is what he believed. Therefore, he used two terms. Poetry should delight, at the same time should become a vehicle for ideas. Any idea. Okay. So it does not imitate life, but it presents its own version of it. So therefore, poetry should not simply imitate the life. Poetry should give a version of life, and only it is for the readers to understand. That's number one. Number two, according to Dryden, the poet is neither a teacher nor a bare imitator. You should never be a teacher as a moral instructor and never be a bare imitator like a photographer, but a creator. A poet should be a creator. He means by creator that one who, with a life or nature as his raw materials, creates the new things altogether resembling the original. This is something very understandable. A poet should see the very similitude of the reality, the likeness of the reality, and should be able to produce something of his own, original. Okay, and the characters of Shakespeare, for example, even say Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, I don't think they could have lived as such, like Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. Persons resembling these two characters could have lived. But then this is a likeness, the very similitude of the reality in which people could have lived like this. That is what John Dryden, voted for. Another point that he says, poetry is a work of art rather than mere imitation. He had a problem with the word imitation. That is why he defined so much. Dryden felt that the necessity of fancy, imagination, what Coleridge would later call, the shaping spirit of imagination. That is why John Dryden was a very balanced person. What was lacking in the ancient age, namely emotion or the imagination, he wants to bring in subtly in poetry, the creation of poetry. And that is what is going to dominate in the following era, Romantic age, imagination. Coleridge, in fact, talks about his fancy and imagination. He wrote for fancy and imagination in the creation of poetry. So these are the views of John Dryden on poetry. And now move on to the next one, drama. Dryden's definition of drama. Dryden expresses his views on drama that what a play should be, therefore, is, he defines like this. A drama should be just and a lively human image of human nature. Okay, a drama should reflect just, fair, objective, at the same time lively image of human nature. The drama should represent its passions and humors. Humors is the nature, human nature. What Ben Jonson defined in Comedy of Humors, in his Comedy of Humors. Each person is governed by one particular humor. For example, Antonysamy may be governed by anger in his life. He is a symbol of anger, because that humor only is so dominating in me. That thyroid only is so dominating in me. So I always act as an angry person. Similarly, there might be other persons who would be very, very submissive, very docile. He wouldn't act. That person may not even act much. So that kind of humor is what Ben Jonson is trying to represent in his Comedy of Humors. Walpole, Alchemist. He has written so many. Every man in his humor, every man out of his humor. These are all some of the plays Ben Jonson has written following this particular theory of humor. How different characters are governed by different humor, different nature. Now, next definition. John Dryden says a drama should be able to change the fortunes to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. Okay. Now, again, he brings in the definition of poetry, that the definition of poetry, whether it is to delight or instruction. Now, for the delight and instruction, for the delight and the value of humankind, the drama should be able to bring about a change, the fortune of mankind, so that the human beings who are watching or reading the play should be able to relate themselves with. Okay. So now the next slide is going to be essay on dramatic poesy, and that is where he gives the various points of view of the ancients, the moderns, and the English and the French. Okay, right. So we will move on to the next one. Though here the one point here is again something repetitive, which will be elaborately given in the next slide after this. Now, before going on to the actual essay on dramatic poesy, what is John Dryden's own opinion about the unity, three unities, violation of the three unities by some writers? As far as the unities of time, place, and action are concerned, the group, namely all the four conversationalists in the essay, discusses that the playwrights like Ben Jonson, Molière, and Shakespeare, with a deeper insight, and John Dryden himself, okay, they all bring in the references to Ben Jonson, Molière, and Shakespeare, John Dryden himself, and justify whether they are violation or the observance of three unities, which we will discuss. Dryden definitely defend English tragic comedy. Many of his predecessors or contemporaries accused whoever violated the form of comedy and tragedy. Nobody wanted that comedy and tragedy to be mixed up. It was first Shakespeare who mixed or mingled tragedy and comedy, and therefore he brought out tragic comedy. All the plays that he wrote during his last phase of life, Shakespeare produced tragic comedy. For example, Tempest starts with a kind of tragedy, ends up in a happy note. Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, okay, anything, even to an extent, The Merchant of Venice starts with an unhappy note and ends with a happy note. So tragic comedy. It was only Shakespeare who mingled these two elements, for which he was criticized and later acclaimed by contemporaries like John Dryden and even Dr. Johnson later. Dryden comments that the French plays may be more regular, more methodical, but they are not as lively as that of English. This is where the problem comes. One can be a drill master, but a teacher has to be inspiring. A teacher has to be different. That is what John Dryden says. Following the drill, being perfect, being very methodical, being a follower of classical rule is one thing, good. That is what the French playwrights have done. Fine. But they are lacking the very lively spirit with which a play or a drama or a play or a poem should reach the readers. For example, in William Shakespeare's plays, the more lively and just images of life can also be observed. The word just here, J-U-S-T, just, represents objectivity. Just, fair, F-A-I-R, fair. Therefore, Dryden here condemns French playwrights for lack of just and lively images that Shakespeare and English playwrights have produced. Okay. So, essay on dramatic poesy and introduction. John Dryden's essay on dramatic poesy presents a brief discussion on neoclassical theory and literature. He defends the classical drama, saying that it is an imitation of life and reflects human nature very clearly. This essay is written in the form of a dialogue, as I told you, among four gentlemen: Eugenius, Critus, Lesideius, and Neander. These are the four names. Neander speaks for Dryden himself. Okay, now Eugenius favors modern English drama, modern English dramatist, by attacking the classical playwrights who did not themselves always observe the unity of plays. He says the modern, in general modern, and particularly English, Eugenius favors or advocates or privileges the modern playwrights over the classical playwrights. According to him, classical playwrights themselves did not follow the unity of plays, and that is the criticism he gives. I will talk about it later. Critus defends the ancient writers, and points out that they invented the principles of dramatic art, are paved by Aristotle and Horace. Critus opposes rhyme in plays and argues that though the moderns excel in sciences, the ancient age was true of age of poetry. Moderns may be good at science, but the ancients are the ones who really excelled in poetry. Lesideius, of course, defends the French playwrights and attacks the English tendency to mix genres. I said earlier, comedy and tragedy. 1 minute. Yeah. Neander speaks in favor of the moderns and respects the ancients. Neander is, however, critical of the rigid rules of drama and favors rhyme, use of rhyme. Neander, who is a spokesperson of Dryden, argues that tragicomedy, the phrase John Dryden himself called it as a tragicomedy, tragi, T-R-A-G-I hyphen comedy, tragicomedy, tragic comedy. That means the play starts with a tragedy and ends in comedy. I think that is how most of the plays, most of the even films now are sound, because the argument given to this particular form is, after all, life is a combination of happiness and sad experience, happy experience and sad experience. Life is a combination of both light and dark. So that's it is inevitable. So he says tragic comedy is very closer to life because the tragedy, the plays are reflecting emotions which are sometimes heightened by mirth, happiness, and sometimes marred by sadness. That is the reason why English drama, English playwrights have used the form tragic comedy, and which Neander favors. Neander gives his opinion to the violation of three unities because it leads to the variety in the English plays. See, if you understand the definition of three unities, it is restricting the very freedom with which the artist start creating. For example, unity of time. says that the life incidents of a man of one particular day only should be presented on stage. That is more real. How is it possible? Can we present only one particular moment of a character's life? Can we present only the murder scene of Macbeth on the stage and then evolve a drama around this? No, it's not that easy. Macbeth's experience later on after the murder of King Duncan, experience of turmoil, experience of tension, the guilt is more important. That is what we are interested in. That is what makes the readers of Shakespeare wanting to go and read again and again. Okay, so that is where I think this particular variety is found, lacking. Dryden argues against the neoclassical critics to an extent in this particular matter, unity of time, place, and action. Since nobody speaks in rhyme in real life, he supports the use of blank verse in drama and says that the use of rhyme in serious plays is justifiable in place of blank verse. Earlier, the classical writers were in favor of use of rhyme. The rhyme scheme that ends up with the rhyming words. Most of the poetry you find rhyming words. Even the nursery rhyme, Jack and Jill went up the hill. Jill and hill, that rhyme scheme. So that is exactly what classical writers wanted to be followed, the rhyme scheme, which Shakespeare and others Elizabethans violated. They used blank verse. That is something, a free verse that is not following the rhyme scheme. So Dryden himself is in favor of blank verse. In fact, John Dryden, though lived during neoclassical age, though he himself is a neoclassicist, wants to bring in some of the reformed or reformation reformed rules from experimented from Elizabethan age, especially Shakespeare. Okay, Eugenius arguments on the superiority of the moderns over the ancient. This is the actual conversation. With the 4 slides, it will be over. The essay will be over. Eugenius defends the English dramatist of the last age with a highly penetrating insight. It is true, he says, that the ancients, Greek and Roman scholars laid down many basic principles of drama. But the English authors gave due respect to them, but they had no clear-cut concept of dividing a play into acts. The dramatist set the voyage of dividing a play into 5 acts. Most of the ancient Greek playwrights wrote their plays on a highly popular episodes of Thebes or Troy, on which many narrative poems, epics, and plays had already been written. Now, Eugenius, one of the 4 characters in Essay on Dramatic Poesy, argues for the modern writers over the ancients. His main point is the ancient writers created rules, invented rules, the most basic principles of drama. All that is fine. But it is the English who really gave respect to all these rules. Not even the ancients who gave respect to all these rules. That is what he says. And one argument he says, as per Aristotle's advocacy of a drama being divided into 5 acts, it is the English playwrights who divided all the plays into 5 acts. Not even the playwrights who lived along with Aristotle. Therefore, who is superior? The modern writers. He says in one sentence, the rules were framed by the ancients, But actually, who followed those rules? It is the moderns. Therefore, modern writers are superior. That is the point. Then he goes on to say that the spectators found nothing new in them. Many a time they speak out of the dialogues before the actors even spoke them. The English dramatists wrote their plays on new themes. The meaning is, while you are watching the ancient plays written by many writers, including Sophocles, Oedipus the Rex is his play. It was a very famous play, but we cannot criticize that particular play. But then there are many other plays which were written by classical writers, in which the dialogues are so repetitive, so anticipatory that the readers will be able to even guess what is going to come next. Whereas modern playwrights have written many plays where readers found a new theme, a lot of innovation, new ideas, new dialogue, etc. Therefore, modern writers are good. Modern writers are superior. In comedies, the Greek and the Roman playwrights repeated common theme of lost children coming back to their home after a gap of many years. That is a usual comedy. That's the usual storyline. People who are lost coming back their home is often the theme of in the comedies in Greek and Roman playwrights. This is a very oft repeated interest, and therefore spectators were very bored with this particular theme. Whereas if you find in English drama, there are themes that are very quite interesting. Sorry. Especially when you read the plays of Shakespeare. Why we often quote Shakespeare? Because Shakespeare is the one who really excelled in drama before Restoration Age. Another one is definitely Ben Jonson. Another one is Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe. Even Christopher Marlowe is Dr. Faustus, the Jew of Malta, Edward II. These plays were very memorable. Okay, you should all read some of these plays, at least the summary part of it you should read, so that you understand the storyline, the kind of purpose with which they wrote. In all these respects, the English dramatists of the last age were better than the Greek and Roman dramatists. That is what Eugenius says. Now, what does the Critic says in favor of the ancient, against this, against the opinion by Eugenius? Critic begins defending the ancient Greek and Roman poets and dramatists and expresses views that the ancients are better than the modern writers. The ancient writers set rules of drama like Aristotle also laid down the principles of three unities of time, place, and action. By the unity of time, he meant that the action of the play should not exceed compass of a natural day. By the unity of place, he meant the scene ought to be continued in the same place from the beginning till the end. For the stage is but one and the same place. That is the argument. This is the definition of a unity of a time and a place. It is very, very unnatural to shift the action from one place to another, especially to distant places. If one scene is Rome, another scene cannot be in Egypt, just like you find in Antony and Cleopatra. How can readers believe that the same stage in one place is Rome, at another stage it is another scene it is in Alexandria in Egypt? So that's the argument the ancients did, for unity of action, a unity of place. This would give the greatest likelihood to untruth. By the unity of action, he meant that there should not be two or more actions. There should be only one plot. There should not be any subplot. There should not be too many plots. And today you find a movie, Vanam, four different stories are yoked together and they converge very nicely. I think that is all possible, but then according to the ancient writers, they thought that one storyline alone should be there. Only one place alone should be referred to in the particular drama, or the life of characters that happen in one particular day should be presented. That is what they meant by unity of time, place, and action. The ancient observed all the three dramatic unities faithfully, and the Romans, the French, and the English dramatists tried their best to observe them, though not always successfully. Thus, the ancients are our first lawgivers as well as models for the moderns to follow. That is what he says. So, as the lawgivers, they are the primary writers. Lesideius says, defending the French drama and the dramatist, that they far surpass the English and even the Greek dramatist. Corneille and some other French dramatists have so reformed their theatre that no European theatre stands comparison to it. He speaks in favor of Corneille and other French dramatists who have excelled in writing drama. So, as far as the three dramatic unities are concerned, the French dramatists observe them more faithfully than the Greek themselves, who propounded them. In observing the unity of time, they are so scrupulous that the action in some of their plays is limited to only 12 hours, not even 24 hours. To an extent, they even stuck to 12 hours portrayal of a life. How they have taken that particular rule so seriously. The French are equally faithful in observing the unity of a place, and therefore they are superior. Lesideius again goes on to say that many of them limit to the very spot of ground where the play is supposed to begin. However, none of them exceeds the compass of the same town. See, he means to say that the French playwrights followed unity of time, place, and action. Therefore, they are superior. That is what he says. Further, the French generally write their tragedies on well-known historical facts which the people can easily comprehend. They do not make their plots so complicated that the spectators may lose their patience. There is an argument in what Lesideius says also. If there are too many plots, the uneducated readers or the viewers may not even be able to follow the storyline. So in that sense, I think what he says is true. In their place, the hero is most important and the rest of the characters are marginalized to him. Finally, the French write their plays in beautiful rhyming verse, which is far sweeter than the blank verse in which the English plays are written. To sum up, the French playwrights are superior to the English. Even his arguments are very, very neat, because he says in one sentence, French writers follow all the rules and regulations propounded by the ancients, especially three unities, and also make it very, very simple for the readers to understand and follow the use of rhyme. That is also very reasonable. Therefore, the French writers are superior to the English and others. That is what he says. Finally, Neander's view in favor of the English drama. Dryden, in the person of Neander, rise up in the defense of English dramatists and strongly pleads that the English dramatists are fully justified in not slavishly accepting the classical rules in many respects. They have developed their own principles and proved themselves to be superior to the Greek and the French dramatist in many ways. In the first place, French drama, whether comic or tragic, lacks in emotion and passion. I think that's a very important point. Right? English dramatists have portrayed various emotions, especially the emotion love, which is universal, very, very graphically, so poignantly portrayed by English dramatists, especially by Shakespeare. I think that is where English drama is superior to French, even to the ancients. The English tragedies produce fear and pity more powerfully, and their comedies excel in producing delightful humor and romantic love. He equally defends the insertion of underplots which highlight the main plot. Now, English is fond of mixing up even the main plot and the subplot. In Merchant of Venice, you find the main plot being Bassanio and Portia, and the subplot being Jessica and Jessica and her love, the Shylock's daughter, and another English person. That particular plot, main plot and subplot, so gelling, so complementing on each other, that both are inevitable, cannot be separated. That way, I think English dramatists have excelled in their mixing up of a subplot and the main plot. Coming to the dramatic unities of time and place, Dryden says that their observance might adversely affect the total impact of the play. It is unbelievable that sufficient material for the plot of a good play. Finally, that means it is unnatural to restrict the action to one day or one place or one particular action. Therefore, it is so natural as what happens in our life, so spread out, so varied in our experience. Play also should reflect, imitate that kind of nature. Finally, coming to Shakespeare, he says he was the man who, of all modern and perhaps ancient poets, had the largest and the most comprehensive soul. He was naturally learned. He needed not the spectacle of books to read literature. He looked inwards and found them there. Oh, what a beautiful comment. About Shakespeare, John Dryden says that of all modern and ancient writers, the most comprehensive soul that Shakespeare had, to produce is very, very commendable.